Growing up as a low-income immigrant family in America, politics always seemed so far away, so distant, inaccessible, especially for people like us. The lack of seeing someone like me in these sorts of positions certainly fueled the doubt that something like this was even possible. Before I was elected, there was only one other Asian American previously elected in our state's 250-year history. I'm certainly very proud of my Korean heritage. I feel blessed that, I can call myself an American being born and raised in the state of Georgia. I'm blessed to be the first openly gay man ever elected to the Georgia State Legislature. First and foremost, I think I was motivated by the desire to try and make progress on the healthcare issues, the public policy in particular, which I felt so deeply and passionately about. Especially being a minority within a minority, I have an opportunity in America to be an elected official. I don't know if that's something possible in any other country in which you can come from nothing but then become a leader of a state.
Hi, Mira. Say hi.
So I grew up in Georgia, went to a private Christian elementary school, public middle school, high school. It was a Hope Scholarship in Georgia that gave me an opportunity to go to college without incurring financial debt. But it was through law school that I came across public policy and legislation, which took me down this path toward public service, running for office, and my desire to expand access to healthcare for all folks in Georgia. So for the first quarter of every single year, we're down at the state capitol, drafting, negotiating, and passing legislation. For the rest of the year, you have to have some sort of work. Certainly, I think the work in the HIV/AIDS space is, just another reason why it's so important to expand Medicaid. I learned firsthand that, access to healthcare, whether it's public or private health insurance, is a matter of life or death. And certainly many of our clients experience that on a day-to-day basis.
We just realized that people don't even know the difference in a premium or a deductible or what those terms mean, co-insurance. Yeah. So we definitely need to talk about it more. Education is so key. And it's been a huge help to what you've done in the community.
Yeah. That's where a lot of that passion and motivation comes from, right? It's that desire to increase access to healthcare. So I had no intention of running for office. I did not grow up wanting to be an elected official or a politician, but I did feel that running for office would have given me an opportunity to address and make progress on an issue that I very much care about. So back in 2014, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. She went in for surgery to remove what we thought was just a blockage. The surgeon came out and told us, my sisters, my aunt, my family who had been there with her, that he couldn't operate because she had stage 4 cancer. If she did not receive treatment, her life expectancy was 4 to 6 months. With chemotherapy, with treatment, 2 years at most on average. At the same time, in the state of Georgia, our current leaders decided to refuse to expand access to healthcare, which has resulted in more than 500,000 low-income Georgians not having any sort of healthcare. There was no way that my family could have otherwise afforded her chemotherapy, which was at least $30,000 every month. Inspired by my mother's battle against cancer, I decided to take a stand, to jump into the political arena, to use the hardship and the experience that my mother and my family had to try and fight to ensure that every Georgian has access to healthcare. Hey, good to see you, Ron. It is a little weird to be back because the past legislative session was so contentious with us fighting against the voting rights suppression efforts, massive protests. We'll see how crazy things get tomorrow, but it can definitely be considered a circus down at the Capitol. Hey, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, appreciate you including me.
No, thank you. Thank you for offering. Good to see you, Bobby. How are you?
Sam's been a good friend. It's funny, the very first time we met, I asked him what committees he wanted. And one of the committees he said he wanted to be on was Industry and Labor. And the next breath he said, but I won't get it because I'm a Democrat and the Republicans are in charge and the Speaker appoints the members to committees. And I said, you're gonna be surprised. And sure enough, he ended up on my committee. And Sam and I became good friends because he's really smart. I can depend on him in several ways. He's always going to do research and he asks some really intelligent questions.
Chairman Werkheiser and I, we come from very different backgrounds and I'm sure have lived very different lives. But, we share the same desire to improve the laws in the state of Georgia for workers in particular.
We talked about a problem that exists in a gap, that a worker got injured and there was no coverage. Do any of the committee members have a question? Representative Park.
I've got one question. It sounded like you're only concerned with subsection F. Other than that provision, are you otherwise okay with the effort to ensure that there are no loopholes?
Well, I'm a little concerned with the definition of a PEO where it says reserves the right direction and control over the employees.
So in reading the language, it does seem fair.
And Sam is the kind of guy, he's not yelling and screaming. He is a sit down, let's see how we can figure that out. And so I guess we both have that kind of bent, so that's why Sam and I have become good friends. With that, let's stand adjourned. Stay tuned. We will be here again.
Bill, I had two thoughts real quick. This language is essentially what they're doing, right? What PEOs are doing, not the red, but the new language in black, right? If they're covering one employee, they're covering everyone in terms of workers' comp. I think this seems to be what they're concerned about. And so it's reasonable what their concern is.
They're going to say, what if you don't make it known to me? Why should I be?
Then it's still the employer's responsibility. From a political perspective, Gwinnett is the epicenter in the state of Georgia. And for decades, Gwinnett County, like many of the northern suburbs, were conservative strongholds, conservative bastions. And I think a lot of that in part was driven by the homogeneous nature of the population. But over the next decade, Gwinnett will continue to diversify in terms of its population and continue to grow in size. Gwinnett will ultimately be the largest county in the state of Georgia. The redistricting process is the most political of political things that I think anyone can do. And in this hyper-partisan political age, I think a lot of folks are tired, frankly, of the constant back and forth and fighting. But nonetheless, it is a necessary obligation in which we are, per the U.S. and Georgia State Constitution, required to do. The ideal ought to be to give voters, to give Georgians, Americans, an opportunity to choose their elected official, not having politicians choose their voters. Redistricting is a fundamental part of American democracy going back to the very beginning of this country. As population grows, after the census is taken every 10 years, we want to ensure that each district has the same number of people. The redistricting of lines in which you are redrawing the lines, that's certainly become a much more partisan endeavor in which, unfortunately, that has been used to help the political party who is in charge to retain political power.
So all members of the Georgia House of Representatives will report to the chamber and take their seats, the clerk will ring the bell. Chair recognizes Representative Park to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This decade, we as elected representatives in the Georgia General Assembly have the tremendous responsibility to draw fair, non-gerrymandered House district maps. As the Republican map fails to reflect the growing diversity of Georgia and draws one less opportunity district than the proposed Georgia House Democratic Caucus map. And for this reason, I will vote no on House Bill 1EX.
Now the moment we've all been waiting for.
The legislative process, as challenging and as difficult as it is, was ultimately designed to force people to compromise. And as messy as democracy can be, I think time and again it demonstrates that it can be effective.
Despite Democratic opposition, the Republican-controlled House passed its legislative maps by a vote of 99 to 79.
As Gwinnett has diversified, as the next generation has come of age, which has brought in that demographic change, we've seen our elected officials change. So back in 2016, I ran for office, but no one thought that a young Asian American could ever win in that sort of district, because it was a space that, I didn't feel like I belonged, frankly. I was outraised by a 3-to-1 margin the entire time from beginning to end. The odds were certainly stacked against me. I primarily focused on, reaching out and talking to voters of color. The immediate response that I received is, I've lived here for 10 years, for 15, 20 years, and no one has ever come and knocked on my door asking for my vote. So we had about 5 to 7 folks who I would go and knock on, thousands of doors throughout the district. So do you remember the first time I ran for office? And
I absolutely do. I was so thrilled that you were running for office, and the fact that you came to our door over and over. I mean, you were there a lot. And I said, here's a person who really is connecting with his constituency.
Mm-hmm. As the election results started to trickle in, it became clear that we had a shot, that we could actually win. And once the announcement came out, it was just, it was ecstatic.
I started out knocking on doors by myself, and one at a time, people started joining, and look what happened. Like, look what we have now, and I'm so excited because this is just the beginning of it. We've sent an awesome message to the Georgia GOP and to the rest of the state and to the rest of the country. So let's keep it going, and thank you everybody so much.
After I was elected, I had an opportunity to bring my mother down to the House floor and to really give her a sense of how far together as a family we were able to come in this country. It highlights, at least in my mind, but I think certainly in hers as well, that the American dream is alive and well. For a low-income single mom from an immigrant background, raising a son who becomes a state legislator in a state that they've settled down in, their new home in a foreign country, for her as well as for me, demonstrated the possibilities that continue to exist in this country. Because she had access to exceptional care, she lived about 3.5 years without pain. And it was really an opportunity to have a long goodbye with her, understanding that she had a limited amount of time. In March of 2018, after about 3.5 years, my mother eventually passed away. It was definitely something expected, but just the challenge of actually, seeing that through to the end was incredibly difficult. I'm still adapting. I certainly still very much miss my mother, but the difficulties in which I faced at that moment certainly prepared me to fight on behalf of the Georgians who are seeking and who need that same fighting opportunity and that same fighting chance. On March 16th, 2021, a young man in his early 20s purchased a gun and went on a shooting rampage targeting 3 Asian American businesses and killing 8 people within the span of a few hours, 6 of whom were of Asian descent. I think of the 3 or 4 women who were killed in Atlanta. These were women between the ages of 50 and 70 years old of Korean American descent. And when I heard that news, my heart broke and I broke down in tears because of course what immediately came to mind was the passing of my mother. I went to 2 funerals and met with the victims' family members and children of 2 of the mothers who had been shot. It was an incredibly challenging moment in time in which I certainly felt like all the wounds in my heart, were torn open. The United States of America was experiencing a surge in violence and discrimination against Asian Americans, driven primarily by scapegoating the Asian American community for the COVID pandemic. And of course, during the 2020 elections, we saw a historic surge in Asian American participation, which helped elect Joe Biden.
Just days after the mass shooting in Atlanta area, the Vice President Harris and I, we went down to Atlanta to meet with Asian Americans and the community across Georgia. It was a raw and emotional visit we had. We heard about their pain, their fear, anger, and all that existed in the community, and the feelings were about those feelings that they felt invisible.
It was a very intimate, personal, and frank conversation. My primary focus was to convey what the community was feeling and what they wanted the White House to do to ensure that, again, this horrific shooting was not in vain, and that there was meaningful action taken to address the increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans during this pandemic, which we were successfully able to do.
And God bless you all, particularly those who pushed this through and continue to push it. Now I'm going to sign this bill.
It's ultimately up to us to determine the course of our country, but we have to acknowledge and understand that we do retain power and we do ultimately have the ability to make our communities better, to ensure that we are living up to our founding values of ensuring freedom, equality, and justice for all. Everyone loves to beat up on a politician, so it's important to have thick skin. I'll get messages that are nasty, that are mean, that attack my personal character, but it's a reminder of why we have to be resilient and why we have to continue to do this work to ensure that, we are fighting for the truth and that we're trying to continue to find common ground to move us forward together. What is the best way in which I could honor my mother and her memory and her legacy? Well, certainly it's to use the hardship and the tragedy that she faced to do good on behalf of others, since that's something that she wanted to do more than anything in her life. So as a community, as a state, as a country, we're going through very difficult times. But as I was able to overcome the challenges I face, I believe that we can do so collectively as well.